take us back to a few things you said last week. Let's start off with the wealth of documents that we have for these New Testament writings compared to anything else in ancient history.
Well, we've got far more material for the New Testament than we do for any other Greco-Roman materials, writings. If you took the average classical author and stacked up how many books he has written.
Homer, Aristotle, Catullus, Herodotus.
Well, those, I would not call those guys the average ones, but if you talk, Homer's way up there as far, he's the number 2 after the New Testament. But you take some of these average guys, and they have fewer than 20 copies of their manuscripts still in existence. You stack them up, it would be about 4 feet tall.
And also the time, from the time they wrote it to the time that you guys discovered a copy, a lot of them, it's what? It's
usually between 500 and 1,000 years before we get any copies of them at all.
All right.
We're talking about by the time you get to 400 years after the New Testament is completed, we've got 60, 70 copies. I mean, it's by the time we get that far out, we've already got dozens of copies.
And 50 to 100 years from the time that the apostles wrote, how many copies did you have?
We have between 10 and 15 fragments of the New Testament.
Still in existence in your hands today?
Still in existence, yes.
All right. So you've got a wealth of
well, let me compare it if I can. You have these classical writers, their materials stands 4 feet tall. Then you stack up the New Testament documents. We're talking about the Greek manuscripts and the versions. I don't even know how to classify the over 1 million quotations by the Church Fathers. That stack is going to go over a mile high. So no wonder we talk about an embarrassment of riches for New Testament studies.
So this mile-high stack is what your textual criticism is all about. This is your science over here of comparing all of these texts and going word for word and saying, you know, you've got 29,000 manuscripts that have this word right there, and then you go to the next one and the next one. And all right, now, of these manuscript variants, Ehrman says, you know, there are 400,000 manuscript variants, which you agree with.
I agree with that number, yeah.
Okay. So
it's our best guess.
But then he says there's 138,000 verses in the New Testament, so that's like 3 different options for every word in the New Testament.
138,000 words in the New Testament, yes.
Right. Okay, so now if you let's divide that again like we did last week. If you have 100% of the pie is 400,000 manuscripts. We want to say, how in the world do we get that, and does that really damage our looking back at Jesus or Christian doctrine? Let's talk about what those variants are when you count them.
When you think about the numbers that Ehrman keeps spewing out about between 300 and 400,000, at one point he says maybe as high as 500,000, we just don't know. He's constantly putting the emphasis on the quantity. But when you think about the quality of those variants, now it paints an entirely different story. My students at Dallas Seminary right now are taking this class on textual criticism, and they are what's called collating ancient manuscripts. They have to go through and transcribe every single letter. And for the most part, they're very bored with the job because the biggest changes they get are spelling differences. If they see an actual variant that has meaning, it's very, very rare. It's a long time in coming. So they're bored with seeing how much minimal variation we have.
And you're saying, as a textual critic, when you look at this mile-high stack of documents, that you're saying that 75% of all these variants is simply spelling errors,
or nonsense differences. 75%, you throw it away. It doesn't even matter.
Doesn't even matter.
Every time you see the name John, it's spelled with 1 N or 2 N's. It depends on the manuscript, and that's a variant. And then the next largest category is the meaningful variants that are not viable and those that are word order changes, synonyms. That's almost 20,
go back on this thing
25%.
As Jesus loves John. How many ways can you say that?
You can say it 18 different ways.
You could write it 18 different
ways, yeah.
And each time it shows up in a different way, although the meaning doesn't change.
The meaning is exactly
That's a variant.
That counts as a variant.
And you also got 1 million quotations from the Church Fathers that enter into, if they quoted that verse a little differently, even though it's got the same meaning, the fact is that's a variant.
Right.
You got a potential for a big variant count here.
You have a potential for in the millions, in the tens of millions of variants for the New Testament. The fact that we only have 300,000 to 400,000 is minuscule compared to what it could be. Yeah. It's amazing how stable the text has been over the centuries.
Keep going on this pie here. You got 75%, and then you've got
almost 25% that are the ones that are these word order changes or synonyms, and the meaningful variants that are not viable. That is, they don't go back to the original. That leaves us with one category left, and this is the one that Ehrman is really talking about, the meaningful and viable variants. That is, those that affect the meaning of the text and could possibly go back to the original.
And these are less than 1%?
Less than 1%. Smallest category we have by far.
Okay.